educational impact, every educational impact has a dollar impact. So they go together. The budget defines our priorities. And our goal here is to kind of lay the groundwork for the budget, and then when we get to the second budget forum, we'll be talking a lot more specifics. We want to, there hasn't been a lot of talk in the news about the budget this year, and some years it's all over. This year it hasn't necessarily been as much of a topic in the press, in the media. So so we want to bring people up to speed on where we are in the budget context, and we want to talk with people about you know how's that going to play out here as we forecast going forward. So the most important thing I want to say in the big picture about a school budget is that I believe that a school budget is as accountable and as transparent of a budget as you can have in a government, in any level of government. At the school level, we have several things that make the school budget very, very accountable and very transparent. Number one, we have to balance it. So the budget the revenues that we take in must balance the expenditures that we put out. We can't borrow, we can't go into debt, we can't hope we're going to get the money. We have to put in front of the voters exactly how much money we feel we're going to need to spend. We need to put in front of the voters what the revenues, how we're going to gather the revenues for that. So we have to be transparent. One of the things I think is important to recognize is that while districts do have reserves, we might have unappropriated fund balance, for instance, which is 4% of the previous year's budget. It's capped at that, and that's there as for emergencies or unanticipated expenditures into the future. We might have tax tertiary reserves, but those things are not, once the budget is set, once the expenditure budget is set and voted upon by the voters, that budget can't change. It's not like we could say, well, let's take some money from the reserves and do this or that. That can't happen. So the budget has to go forward to the voters, number one, with a balanced budget. Number two, the voters have to vote on it. So unlike other budgets of municipalities and states and the federal government, our voters vote yes or no on whether or not they're going to approve this budget. And then third, the budget and the process of spending those funds is scrutinized. It's scrutinized at multiple levels by auditors. We have a space in the business office, which is a desk for auditors. And they come in that often that they need space designated to be there, and they pore over the records. And folks in our business office spend a great deal of their time providing them with the information that they need to make sure that there's accountability, transparency, and that those funds that the voters are entrusting with us to put together a great education here in BHBL are used properly. So there's a lot of accountability, and there's a lot of technical detail in a budget, and Chris is going to get into some of that technical detail. That's his area of expertise. But at the very basic level, the budget's pretty simple. Okay, it's we need to know what our revenues are going to be. We need to know what our expenditures are going to be. So a little diagram here on the screen will illustrate that. The revenues come from three places. They come from the local tax levy, property taxes. They come from state aid, and they come from a slice of the pie there that's labeled other. And that other represents federal grants, represents fees collected for building use, for instance, or possibly admissions, donations, and then also represents the portion that we might use from a fund balance to balance the budget. So from appropriating money from a fund balance or a savings account to balance the budget. On the other side of the fulcrum are the expenditures, and they're largely personnel related. We're a people business, we employ a lot of people, and those are the expenses that we have. But we also have expenses related to transportation, related to maintaining the plant, related to debt service, things that, all the things that come together year to year to run this organization. So at the very basic level, we have to make sure that the revenues we have coming in balance the expenditures that we project for next year. And we have to make sure we're right. We have to make sure that the funds are available in the budget to keep the organization moving forward. So the forecast, as we look at the current state of things, are that while we still have some work to do to refine the expenditure budget, we do expect that the revenues of state aid and the tax levy will be slightly lower than what the expenditure budget will be. So the gap will exist, a small gap. And So the expenditure budget is the rollover of the expenses without adding new things, just rolling over the expenses of what we have. We base most of our expenses on contracts because, as again I said, largely people business, and those salaries are governed by contracts. We move those forward, and we're looking at a rollover of budget to budget of somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. On the other side of the coin, we have the revenues, and the revenues, we are looking at a tax cap of around 2.29%, which means that the maximum that the tax levy would increase would be 2.29%. And then on the state aid front is a 0.8% increase predicted for us in the governor's round of the budget. So as we come to you tonight, we're looking at a 0.8% increase in state aid and a potentially up to 2.29% increase from the tax levy. So when you look at that side of the equation, and then you look at the other side of a budget to budget increase of somewhere between 2.5% to 3%, there's a bit of a gap there. So how do we look at filling that gap? How do we address that gap? And I want to make sure right at the front of the presentation, we mentioned that the gap will be addressed in two ways. In number one, looking to our legislators to lobby for a modest increase in the foundation aid that's going to be allocated to us by the state. A 0.8% increase in foundation aid is difficult to deal with when you're looking at a 2.5% to 3% increase in costs. And then we also will look to use some fund balance to make up that gap to what we don't see if we do not see an increase in the legislative run on the state aid. So we do not anticipate exceeding the tax levy cap. We do not anticipate raising revenue in that way, and we do not anticipate program cuts. Those are other ways that you could make that budget balance. So the bottom line is we have to make the budget balance. We plan to do it by hopefully seeing a bit of an increase in that state aid. And it's not unreasonable to think that we may. The governor's budget puts out is kind of the most, typically be the most frugal. And also the governor, while he has announced a relatively large increase to education aid, much of that is tagged to different programs that he wants to see put into place. So the aid is there. He says something along the lines of a 4% increase in aid, but the aid is tied to various programs that he'd like to see districts enact, which would cost that aid, which you need to use that aid for. It's likely, that the legislature will work with him to achieve some sort of balance, and that they'll increase the general aid. So I don't think it's unreasonable for us to think a little bit about that general aid going up. So we're in bottom line a position to weather the fact that our state aid may be relatively low this year without cutting programs for students. In fact, we want to look to, within the existing budget that we have, continue to improve our programs and look at ways to do, we never stay stagnant. We want to look at ways of doing things differently each year so that we can improve. But at the same time, and I want to mention back one slide here, that we don't, if we spend a small amount of a fund balance to maintain that gap, we don't do that without a lot of thought and a lot of planning. Our Board of Education has spearheaded, with Mr. Abdu's expertise, a 5-year financial plan. This is a serious document and a great investment of time on the part of a number of our board members as well as Chris. And this is trying to model what the decisions we make today how they will affect things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. In other words, if we use this amount of fund balance, if we can expect this amount of state aid, if we predict this amount of change in different expenses along the way, major expenses, health insurance, for example, or increases in energy costs, and modeling that out, and then looking at how do the decisions that we make affect where we'll be 5 years from now. So when we sit down at the 2019-20 budget, which isn't that far away, we'll be in a position where we'll know what the next 5 years will look like, and we'll be carefully making these decisions along the way. So I want to mention that when we say that continued gaps of this type can't be sustained every year, that's that's not just a guess, that's based on our analysis of the 5-year trends and on the different assumptions that we're making about where things are going to go in the near future. So it's a year that we don't expect a tumultuous budget year, but it's something that we have to take very seriously when we're dealing with issues of this magnitude and the potential effects that they have moving forward. So that's the big picture. I'm going to welcome our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, or I'm sorry, for Business, our Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, and our Business Official, Chris Abdu.
Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay. I don't hear it yet. Is it on?
I can hear you.
You can hear me online. Can everyone hear me without the mic? Okay. Very good. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I have the pleasure of standing before you now for the second year in a row in this role. Very happy to be here at Hills-Ballston Lake.
It's not picking up that. Hold on 1 second. Can you try to say something, Chris?
Test.
We can hear you now.
We okay?
Yes.
Well, anyway, I'll skip the pleasantries then. I'm very happy to be here in my second year here at Hills-Ballston Lake, and I'm pleased to present the budget to you tonight. Just as a reminder, as what Patrick McGrath said earlier, Superintendent McGrath, at this stage it is still a working budget. None of the numbers you're going to see up here are necessarily final. We're still refining all the numbers. We're still waiting for a final revenue budget from the state legislature, among other things. First thing I want to mention is that in addition to being a school administrator and an auditor for one of the big four accounting firms, I also, in the past, have been a social studies teacher. And one of the things I used to use in my classes were political cartoons that sometimes could convey a message. In some ways, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I thought this political cartoon that appeared in the Daily Gazette was one that spoke 1,000 words regarding the situation that we have here now. And I'll let the cartoon speak for itself, but that is apparently Governor Cuomo representing the state legislature, and here are the school districts depicted there. We could go one forward. I want to spend a little bit of time, based on that political cartoon, talking a little bit about the governor's proposal. And right here, you will see that the governor is consistently referencing this number down here. Over an $800 million increase to schools, or roughly 3.8% over the previous year. However, we need to break that down a little bit to see how that impacts Hills-Ballston Lake. First of all, if you look...
Chris, can you move over kind of where I was standing? The mic that needs to pick you up is this one right here.
Okay. Can I stand here? All right. First of all, if you look at these numbers down here, these bottom four numbers, statewide universal full-day pre-kindergarten, grants and other programs, performance grants, and this one right here, the fiscal stabilization fund, that actually no one knows what that is. Right now, that is just a placeholder implemented by the governor for the legislature to figure out what they want to do with it. These bottom four numbers have absolutely no impact on the operating budget of Hills-Ballston Lake. So those are not even part of the equation of anything that might assist us. Items like transportation aid and BOCES aid, and then building aid down below are reimbursements for expenditures that were made in the previous year. So while we appreciate the reimbursements for those expenditures, those don't necessarily help us with our operating expenditures. And as Superintendent McGrath referenced, we're largely a people business. Our expenditures are generally related to people. These items don't really help us in general with the expenses related to our personnel. So that leaves us with one other item, this GEA that we're going to talk a lot about in a couple minutes. It stands for the Gap Elimination Adjustment. There's a restoration here. You see a negative and then another negative. This is the amount in previous years that the state has subtracted from their aid to school districts in order to balance the state budget. Now again, you'll look this year, these are in millions, so this represents $1.6 billion for the 13-14 school year, the year we're in right now. That's projected to be reduced slightly to $1.3 billion in the 14-15 school year. So this part right here, this $323 million, is the part that really significantly matters to Hills-Ballston Lake. There's one more caveat to this though. In the governor's proposal, he has indicated that 70% of this money is to go to what they determine at the State Education Department are high-needs districts. Hills-Ballston Lake is not a high-need district. In fact, the State Education Department does not even classify us as an average need district. We are the only district in Saratoga County and one of only two in Saratoga and Schenectady County that is classified by the State Education Department as a low-need district, the other one being Niskayuna. Because of that, in this formula, we are not getting, I don't want to use the word equal share, but we are not getting as much as some other schools would receive from the reduction to that gap elimination adjustment. So that brings us to where we are. Did you go to the, okay. So a little bit about the GEA. As you can see on the screen, it was implemented by former Governor Patterson, and it was in response to the fiscal crisis that the state was facing. At that point in time, if you look back, there was a significant crash in the stock market, probably the worst since the Great Depression in 1929 and throughout the 1930s. So the state reacted to that, and the way they reacted to that was to balance their budget by eliminating some of the funding to schools. As you can see, we've lost nearly $12 million due to the GEA, and there's another name that they called it before they called it the Gap Elimination Adjustment. Those two items combined is nearly $12 million. This year, coming up, we're still estimated at Hills-Ballston Lake, another $1.6 million in next year's budget. Now, the BOCES Communications Service has put together a nice video that actually gives the details on the GEA in a pretty easily explainable manner. So I'll go ahead and I'll stand aside and let them present it.
That's true.
Gap Elimination Adjustment, or GEA as we will refer to it from now on, is one of the major reasons why our public schools are in fiscal peril. Governor Patterson, the state attempted to close a $10 billion budget deficit by spreading the funding shortfall around to all school districts in the state. This was accomplished through a reduction in the amount of state aid originally due to all districts. In layman's terms, you have an agreement with a man on the street to do yard work for $50 per month. He's a little short this month though, so for the same work he offers you $45 instead. The following month he is still short and pays you only $43, then maybe you get $44 the following month, and so on. Since the GEA was introduced 4 years ago, New York schools have lost out on $7.7 billion in aid that was promised to them by law. That averages out to $2,895 per student over that period of time. Why does this matter to us? Because school districts only have a few options to try and make that money up. One option is to raise property taxes in order to keep programs and services sustained at the current levels. Another option is to start decreasing programs, services, and staff. Oftentimes, art, music, advanced placement courses, and support staff like counselors and psychologists are the first to go. But wait, didn't the state promise an increase in aid this next budget year? Well, that depends on what you define as an increase. Remember the yard work you've been doing and getting shorted on a little bit every month? Well, this month you were paid $45. That's better than the $44 from last month, but it is still not the $50 you were promised. It is actually a decrease disguised as an increase. Despite talk of a projected budget surplus of $2 billion in 2016 and 17, there is no end to the GEA in sight. So what can we do about it? Learn about how the GEA is hurting your district as it relates to programs and services. Learn about the opportunities that are being lost for your children and make the decision to act. Write letters, make phone calls, and meet face-to-face with your legislators and ask them to support bills that do away with the GEA. Log on to educationspeaks.org to learn more about advocating for school finance.
Okay, and I think the bottom line of that video, the message that it's trying to convey, is that the GEA was implemented at a time when the state was in fiscal peril, fiscal crisis. By all accounts, that fiscal crisis is ending. Personal income growth is growing in New York State at over 3% per year. They're expecting increases in sales tax and income tax revenues. So the foundation aid formula that was passed under Governor Spitzer, we think it should still be running. It should run as designed without a need for the gap elimination adjustment. Just to kind of show what that meant, in 2009-10, this was the total aid to school districts in New York State. Now, this doesn't necessarily represent the specifics of Hills-Ballston Lake, but this is the statewide funding that the state provided to schools. And again, as you can see, in 2009-10, this was the level it was at. These were the years of the gap elimination adjustment, which we still have today. So even though the governor's proposal shows funding of $21.28 billion statewide, that's still less than what school districts received in 2009-10. So while we truly appreciate and are thankful to the legislature and the governor for this increase, we're still not where we were 5 years ago. And again, for Burnt Hill's specific situation, our state aid roughly mirrors what happened at the statewide level. One other item of concern to us is that there only for 2 of the past 24 years has New York State actually had a working school funding formula. Those happened to be the first 2 years that foundation aid was enacted. All the rest of those 22 years, there has been no true state aid formula for allocating state revenue or state school aid to school districts. Instead, the political reality has been what you've seen above. State aid to schools is carved out by geographic area and by legislative district. And year after year, these percentages that go to different parts of the state stay relatively the same, in order for the legislatures to be able to say that they've allocated enough revenue to their specific constituents. Again, if you're wondering where we are in this, right here, we're considered rest of state. So that's where we are in this column. Again, just to reiterate, Governor Cuomo's budget proposal, as Superintendent McGrath indicated, he's claiming it's 3.8%, and in some ways it is, depending upon how you divide the numbers and look at the math. For Burnt Hills-Ballston Lake, that increase is only 0.85%. And again, as I indicated, we're still less than where we were 5 years ago. And there's a lot of information, if anybody would like to look it up, at bhbl.org/budget. You can go there to learn quite a bit more about some of the specific facts and figures. All right, the tax levy cap. We're going to go through this just a bit to try to explain how that works. We're in the third year of a tax levy cap now, so I think everyone, for the most part, has started to become familiar with how it works. First point to note about the tax levy cap is it's really not a 2% tax levy cap. It's a relatively involved formula that I'll try to go through in a summary to show how it actually works. In the first 2 years of the property tax cap, there was a number in there that was 2%. And that number was kind of based upon what the tax cap could or couldn't be. This year, as I'll show in a minute, there is no 2% anywhere in the formula I'm about to show you. So this is how the tax levy cap is determined. Again, not 2%. The only area where you see 2% is right here is the allowable levy growth factor. And again, it's 2% or less because it is either 2% or the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is a representation of inflation. Due to the low inflation this year, this number is not 2%, it's 1.46%. So that has had the effect of depressing the tax cap even lower than it otherwise might have been. But you've heard me say 2%, you've heard me say 1.46, but Superintendent McGrath referenced the 2.29% tax levy cap for the coming year. The question of how we get to that is based upon the factors you see here. To start with, prior fiscal year tax levies, the taxes we've levied in the 2013-14 school year, times the tax-based growth factor. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit because this is actually an important number, and it actually has some pretty positive news about what's going on here in our school district. Regardless of how it applies to the tax cap, it's something that's kind of an encouraging sign. Plus, pilots receivable in the prior fiscal year. Pilot stands for payments in lieu of taxes. We don't have many of those here in Burnt Hills-Ballston Lake. Those are generally awarded by the industrial development agencies to different industrial or commercial enterprises that come in and produce a lot of jobs for an area. An example of a pilot locally was formerly in the GE wind turbine plant. It's in the Shellmont Central School District. Burnt Hills-Ballston Lake is about 90% residential. We don't have that type of industry within our district, so we don't have many pilots. As you'll see in a minute, we have one pilot in the district, and that's for less than $7,000 a year. Minus the capital tax levy. One of the things that the state has indicated, and they understood when they created the tax cap formula, is that things like capital projects were voted on separately. And when voters vote on a capital project, it's with the understanding that some of that capital project will be funded locally, and some will be funded by state building aid. So that local share, for Burnt Hills-Ballston Lake, it's generally 26% of each project, as the state generally funds 74% of the aidable expenses, is borne by the local taxpayers. And the state recognized that the voters have already voted on that once, and so they exclude that from the tax levy cap. And there's that allowable growth factor we talked about a minute ago. Minus pilots receivable in the coming year, that gives us our tax levy limit. Plus a net transfer of government function determined by OSC. We don't have that here in Burnt Hills. Adjusted for transfer of function. Tax levies necessary for court orders or tort judgments. We do not have any of those here in Burnt Hills. We also don't have this. This was an exclusion that the district had last year. The district's tax cap last year was roughly 3.7%, I think 3.69 to be exact. And the reason it was that high was due to the very large increase in the teachers' retirement system last year. The state determined that if that rate, not the total cost to the district, but if the rate went up by 2% or more, and last year it went up from 11.84 to 16.25, a school district could exclude the amount over 2% from the tax cap, which pushed our tax cap all the way up to about 3.69% last year. Again, TRS is going up again next year, as we'll talk about in a minute, but it is not going up by more than 2%, so there is no exclusion to the tax cap for that this year. And then finally, we have the capital tax levy for the coming year, for 2014-15, we add that back. We subtract it out for the 13-14, our current year, and we add it back for 14-15. Now, what do those numbers look like? I do have to thank Mr. Pericone, who was able to create this, and I think it's a really great way to show how this impacts everything. Again, our prior year tax levy, $35,953,000, times that growth factor of 1.0059%. What this factor indicates is new construction in the district. So basically, you take this factor, last year's tax levy base, and you multiply it by that 1.0059 to reflect that growth. Now, this has the effect of increasing the tax levy, but it will also have the effect of, in most cases, meaning that the tax levy increase is likely going to be greater than the actual tax rate increase that homeowners will experience once a tax levy is passed or the budget passes in May. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But just this piece right here, there are many districts whose growth factor is 1, meaning that they have had no new construction growth in their school districts during the year. Aside from the tax cap, what this is showing us is even though we're not getting a lot of industrial or commercial growth in the district, that's really not the characteristic of Hills-Ballston Lake. Home construction is occurring there. And that's a positive sign. That means people do choose to live here. It's a desirable community to be in, and we are seeing that growth occur. I will say in a minute that this 1.0059% has the effect of increasing the tax levy cap from 1.7% to the 2.29% that Superintendent McGrath referred to. So if there was no growth in the district, the tax levy cap would be even lower, about 1.7%. Our pilots, as I referenced earlier, tax levy for this current year, about $578,000. There's that 1.46% increase. And then we subtract out that same pilot for next year as it's not changing. And we go through. Add back the capital levy for next year, which is increasing slightly from last year, not very much, to give us what is calculated at this point in time with the guidance from the Comptroller's Office as our tax levy limit for next year. Now again, it's referred to as a tax cap, but a better way to look at it is a voter approval threshold. If Hills-Ballston Lake asks the voters to approve a budget with a tax levy of this amount or lower, it would require 50% plus 1 of our voters, 50% plus 1 voter, to pass the budget. If we were to ask the voters for a budget that's above this amount, it would require 60% plus 1 voter to pass. As Superintendent McGrath indicated, at this point in time, I do not believe the district has plans to ask for an override of that tax levy cap. Now again, this is the old accountant. I understand, I like the way that's graphically depicted, but at the end of the day, I like things in linear columns with everything lined up. So I go back to that occasionally. And this is basically the same information that was on the last page, just lined up in a different format. All right, and the last thing I want to talk a bit about is the expenditure side of our budget. We really can't talk much more about the revenue side because we don't have final numbers yet from the state. We don't have a legislative budget, and we should have that on time. We spoke with some representatives today from the New York State Council of School Superintendents and the State Aid Planning Service, who work very closely with legislators in Albany and monitor what they're doing very closely. And they have told us that we should expect an on-time budget again this year. So by the end of March, we should have a final legislative budget, so we'll know what's happening here in Hills-Ballston Lake. But these are the numbers as it stands. Working budget is $60,799,000. I fully expect that we'll be able to recommend a budget that is lower than this to the Board of Education when all is said and done. And Superintendent McGrath referenced between 2.5 and 3%. Right now we stand at 3.02, but I do believe that this is going to come down a bit from then if everything goes as according to plan. And again, that 2.29% estimated tax levy cap. One other thing I want to mention at this point is it is a proposal of the governor right now. We don't know a lot of the details. We don't know what the legislature is going to do with it. But he has indicated that if school districts stay beneath the tax levy cap for this coming year, it is in his plan that he would refund that tax increase to the residents of the district, to the voters in the coming year. So in essence, if we stay under that 2.29%, the governor will refund the difference between what a 0% tax levy would have been and the 2.29% or less increase that the district adopts. And again, there's not a lot of details on that at this point. This is a proposal of the governor, and it's something that, that we wanted to make everyone aware of. We'll see where that goes, and hopefully we'll have more information on that as time goes on. Areas of increase in our budget. As I referenced earlier, we belong to the New York State Employees Retirement System, which generally references our non-certified, non-instructional employees, and the Teachers Retirement System, which are most of our certified administrators and teachers are part of. The change next year, again, the Teachers Retirement System is going up from 16.25% of salary to 17.53% of salary next year. Again, not the large increase we saw last year from 11.84 to 16.25, but enough to see an increase in that pension cost. It's not an insignificant increase, but it is not nearly the order of magnitude that we saw last year. The employee retirement system is actually decreasing slightly from 20.9% of salary to 20.1%. Combining the two together gets us to that level of $450,000 that you see here. Staff salaries. This is the largest increase over last year. However, we need to put a couple caveats here. This does include contractual salary increases, but it also includes some new positions that the district added during the 13-14 school year. Some of those positions were related to student safety and security monitors that were hired, as well as a director of security. And they also included some response to intervention teachers who were added to support our students and to give them some of the extra help. Hopefully that will help them perform and achieve more of their potential at the elementary and middle school level. So that doesn't represent just staff salary increases, that also represents increases in personnel. Transportation includes transportation debt service, a slight increase of $53,000. BOCES is the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. We belong to the Capital Region BOCES group, and we purchase services from them. We anticipate those services going up by $223,000 next year. Again, a slight caveat to this, we have moved some of our expenses related to our digital printers and copiers from a private contract to a BOCES contract. And again, that does show an increase in this overall line. However, what it also does is it's a service that generates BOCES aid. So by purchasing these through BOCES, we get 60% of the eligible funds back from the state in the subsequent year. Now again, that doesn't necessarily help the overall state budget, but it is something that helps Hills-Ballston Lake by driving more revenue to the district. Transfers to other funds, we do anticipate transferring some money into our special aid fund related to special education services that are provided over the summer. And at this point, we are estimating that we will need to transfer some money into our cafeteria fund in the coming year. And all other increases are $185,000. Decreases we're projecting for next year have to do with natural gas and electricity. One of the benefits of the tradition here at Burnt Hills of doing capital projects every 5 years to address our critical infrastructure needs, among others, is that we focus a lot on making our buildings more energy efficient. And we continue to see the benefits of that. Right now, what was done last year were the high school windows. Windows that were quite old were replaced. I will tell you that I visited some of those classrooms and it was snowing both inside and out. I understand there's some people here that have also had experience with that. So one of the things we're happy to do, not just for the comfort of our students and our staff, but also helps us with natural gas usage. So this is something that we're very happy to see, and the benefits of the continuation of our capital projects. Our overall debt service is going down by $170,000. And one of the questions someone might ask is, why is the capital exclusion going up if our overall debt service is going down? One of the things that occurred, remember how I indicated it was the net local share? We have debt service going down, but because of the nuances of one of our bonds that's expiring, where the state aid we were receiving on that bond was actually greater than the expenditures we had related to the amount of the bond. As that bond expires, we end up in this situation where even though we are losing the debt service, the expenditure side, we're losing more on the revenue side than on the expenditure side, which causes that capital exclusion to go up slightly. And the last thing I want to talk about is there's one item you don't see up here that has been up there in many previous years, and that's health insurance. And one of the things that I think this district has been very successful with is in collaboration with our collective bargaining associations, the district has a health insurance committee. And even though there have been several factors that have been putting a lot of upward pressure on our health insurance, most notably the Affordable Care Act has been putting a lot of upward pressure on our health insurance premiums. One of the things that we have done is work very hard with our collective bargaining units to find ways that are mutually beneficial to both them and to the district in order to reduce costs. And one of the big ones has been Medicare Advantage plans. And we've worked very hard to show the benefits of Medicare Advantage plans to our retirees that are over 65, and many of them have chosen to go onto those Medicare Advantage plans instead of staying on the district's traditional health insurance. By doing that, they've reduced their out-of-pocket expenses, the amount they're paying for premiums, because they pay 50% of the health insurance costs. The district pays the other 50%. By making that switch, they've ensured that they're going to receive the care they need, a good effective health insurance plan. But it's a lower cost to them, and it's also a lower cost to the district. So I'm pleased to report that that's a great cooperative endeavor we've had, and I think it's borne some fruit for the district. So I am happy to say that we're going to see that out here this year. And last part is just where do we go from here? There are finance committee meetings in the beginning of March. As we receive updated data, we will be speaking with the Board of Education. We'll be having some meetings to determine what our next course of action is from here. There will be another forum on April 1st on the nearly complete budget, a final finance committee meeting on April 3rd, and then the board will approve the budget, is scheduled to approve the budget on April 8th. Board of Education candidates are required to file by April 21st, Board of Education candidates on May 5th. Budget hearing on the 13th of the final budget, and the budget vote will be May 20th from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the high school gym. So with that, I'll turn it over. I think we have some questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Let's try to do this here so we can talk both with folks here and also at home. We have, I think there was up to almost 30 people online, Tara. So that's pretty good. We have about a dozen people here, so including some members of our Board of Education. Most of our Board of Education, John Blowers is here, Joe Periconi, as you saw, James Mon, and Leanne, our president is here, Leanne Ritzla, is joining us as well, and a number of residents and a couple of employees. So we have some questions that came in online, so we can go to those. But if people here, when we get started, does anybody have any questions for Chris or for myself? Well, let's start. If you think of one, we'll start with the ones that came in online. So the first question, I'm going to turn over to Chris, and this question asks: when the governor talks about a budget surplus, he is including, is the listener correct in assuming that he's including funds that support the state budget that come from the GEA, from schools?
The governor talks about a budget surplus. When he's speaking about a budget surplus, the governor is doing his best to hold down state spending, and he's also looking at increases in state revenues from the income tax and the sales tax. Again, as the economy recovers, unlike the property tax that a school district relies on, without increasing taxes at all, as the economy improves, as personal incomes grow, and as sales tax receipts grow, the state will take more money into its coffers. So when he talks about a budget surplus, he is still including that gap elimination adjustment in there. I think one of the arguments that many would make is that since there is a surplus now that he's projecting, maybe it's time to at least talk about, if not eliminating the gap elimination adjustment entirely, at least bringing it down. But yes, if the gap elimination adjustment were brought down, that would eat into whatever surplus the governor is projecting. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it's saying, it's kind of editorializing a bit and saying, making the point that there's a budget, but there's still a gap elimination adjustment.
Correct.
So
there's a surplus. They both exist concurrently. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So along those lines too, I wanted to just mention that one of the things that Chris had said, which I think is really important to think about because the debate will start up now about this tax freeze plan. That's going to be kind of one of the things that takes front and center. And just, as a finance committee and as a district, we've just been talking about the fact that while that will essentially freeze the local taxes for a couple of years, because the governor or the state legislator will be issuing a check to refund the amount that it's increased, the tax levy will continue to increase. So at whatever point the district or the governor or the legislature decides to stop issuing those refunds, the tax levy is going to be 2%, 4%, 6% higher than it is right now. And so it really is a temporary thing that might look good in certain times politically, but it's not really helping the local tax levy to stay at a freeze. And what could work, in my opinion, and I think that we've shared with some different people at the legislative level and at the district or at the state level associations, would be to say, listen, if the state would give us some of that surplus that they were gonna give as a freeze will really freeze taxes. We'll have a 0% tax increase, no increase in taxes, and let the state issue the district and state aid the difference that we would have collected in the local tax levy. And that way, you know, we're able to truly freeze the tax levy. And that way, 2, 4, 6 years from now, whenever they were not able to give us that, the tax levy is what it was in 2014-15. So a thought and something that, you know, maybe could gain some traction, but certainly a different approach than what the governor is recommending.
Sure. Another question that came in, how come salaries are going up over 1 million when last year the increase was only 422,000? There's a couple different reasons for that. First of all, it's at the stage of budget development that we're in now. When we reference the 422,000, I'm pretty certain it's referencing the final amount that was in the final budget. And as I indicated before when I said that this budget is likely to go down, I fully expect this number here to drop, the staff salary increases. One particular reason is that many teachers give their retirement notice to the school district by March 1st. Well, today is February 27th, and while some of them have already given it to us already, some like to wait till the last minute, and I think we received some today, we may receive some tomorrow. When a teacher retires, we are generally replacing a teacher that is at a higher salary step with one that comes in that makes a significantly lower salary. Once we take that into account, as well as items such as federal grants, we're still trying to get clarification on the amount of federal grants we could receive, which would take salaries out of the general fund and put them into those federal grants going forward. But again, 422,000 was where we ended up last year. There are going to be differences in salary schedules every year, but we're not there yet. We've got a couple different factors. We still have to see how they come in. I do believe it is probably going to be slightly more than the 422,000 from last year, due again to some of those staffing increases we've had related to student performance and safety and security. But again, it's early. I do expect that to come down. We'll have more information on that as we look at the finance committee meetings coming up and the final budget form later on.
Is it fair to say that that's probably the largest area of still work to be done on the working budget?
I agree. That's one of the areas where we still have a lot of information yet to come in, and we're hoping to see how that comes down. But I am confident that we'll see that number decrease by the time we're in the final form. Do you have another one?
I do. Okay, we have a question that came in that asks, is the 5-year plan something that the board will share with the community? And the answer is yes, and we continue to and have. One of the things that we do is quarterly updates where we take a look at the quarterly report, how are we doing as a district, and are there assumptions that we have in the 5-year plan that we need to adjust or change based on environmental or statewide changes. So we do look at it quarterly at board meetings and finance committee meetings. In fact, Tuesday night we have a finance committee meeting in open session. That meeting is here in the high school library at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. People are welcome to come by. And then we could present formally on it as well at a board meeting and a program review, which might be interesting to do.
Another question I have, I'm seeing more lobbying than ever to get rid of the gap elimination adjustment. Do you think the legislature might act on this? Well, I hope so. I think that's the short answer to that is I hope so. I think it's something we'd like to see. This year I've also, not only as an administrator that I was here last year, I've also become a parent here in the Hills-Ballston Lake Central School District this year. And I can tell you there are some amazing, incredible things that happen in this district. I couldn't be happier with the education my children are receiving. And the district is in the financial position in the short term to be able to continue to provide that high level of education. And I think that's something the superintendent, district administration, the board of education, and the staff always works on. But as that gap elimination adjustment stays into effect, it's going to become increasingly harder year after year after year. So we're hoping very much that the state will take some action. The legislature will come through and they'll work hard to do what they can to help us in state aid with our school aid runs from the state.
There's a question here that says, with all the improvements coming from upgrades, wouldn't gas and electricity go down? Dave, if you could just go back a couple slides to the last slide that Chris had. I think, yeah, there we go. It just was just to notice that it is one of the things that came down, and we've been able to decrease the line in the budget that's devoted towards, of course, gas and electricity is something that you can't 100% predict. Obviously, we're having a pretty harsh winter, and it has significant increases on 6 different buildings. When 6 different buildings are being heated, our 5 schools and our administrative building, as well as our transportation department, that it really does make a difference. So you have to be careful about how much you budget to make sure that you do cover that. But now for several years in a row, we've been able to continually bring that budget line down. So that's going down. And along the same lines, a question came in that said, are you looking into getting air conditioning in the schools as part of the upgrades? And I'll let Chris jump in on this, but I know that putting air conditioning in existing space is very, very expensive, very difficult to do. One thing, when you put air conditioning, high efficiency air conditioning into spaces that are newer spaces, it's definitely easier to do and also can be much more cost efficient. There's a definite benefit to having air conditioning in spaces. Certainly when we have the opportunity to do year-round things, which our buildings are open through so much of the year. So where we can do it as a cost-effective measure of the capital project, we'll be doing that. And where we can do it, we'll be doing it. And then if there's opportunities to increase things, like for example, perhaps the high school auditorium, as we do the new addition in the high school, it might make sense if the bids come in low enough to include that into that process, because it's happening right there, and that's a real common place where the air conditioning would be a good thing. So, you have any other questions?
Well, that's the one I wondered if you wanted to take that.
What do you see as the financial impacts of the Common Core in the coming years? That's a good question. There are financial impacts of state mandates all the time, and the Common Core certainly has been a state mandate that we've taken on. Because of the fact that we need to make sure that we get high quality professional development for our teachers, so that our teachers are able to really take the time to learn the new standards from the state and to understand how their instruction and teaching changes, and so that's an important part, and that does have a cost associated with it as we move to these new standards. There's a cost related to testing. The testing, by the way, I'll take a chance to plug our testing forum on the 26th of March. We'll be in the middle school cafeteria, and we'll be talking about testing as a topic. We spent some time talking about the standards back in October, the standards themselves. Now we're looking to move to talking about testing as we head into the 3 through 8 testing season. And then we're hopefully going to be able to have an opportunity later in the school year, towards the end of the school year, to talk about data and the way that the data portion of the Regents Reform Agenda. So are there financial impacts? Sure, there are. I think the main part for us that we've seen right now has been our commitment to getting our teachers the kind of professional development that they need for the new standards.
I'm going to take this question. I'll leave this one with you while I answer this. The question is, will you see significant savings by moving the district offices? And that's a great question, and it's one we answered quite extensively during the capital project process. One of the things we're fortunate to have here is we have a great amount of longevity among some of the staff that stay here. And Christy Moulter, who was Tara Mitchell's predecessor here as a communications specialist, was able to pull up an aerial view of Charlton Heights and of the Hofstadter building. Now, if any of you are familiar with this, Charlton Heights is basically a sister building to Hofstadter. They have almost the same square footage, they have the same layout, etc. And this picture was taken in the heart of winter. And one of the things that was fascinating about the two pictures is I don't think there's a significant difference in snowfall amounts in Glenville and Charlton. But Charlton Heights had a nice thick snowpack on the top of its roof. When you looked at that same picture of Hofstadter, you could see the black tar of the roof. Well, what does that mean? Any homeowner can say the same thing. If you see icicles on your roof, or if you see no snowpack on top, that means your heat is escaping right up outside the roof of your house. Same is true for our school buildings. The Hofstadter building has not seen the capital improvements that our other buildings have been, very much because there's no students there. It's not a student-occupied building. So clearly, by selling the Hofstadter building and putting it out of use, we're going to have some energy savings there, because the building is just very energy inefficient compared to our other buildings in the district. Second, while this capital project is increasing the space available to students, it is decreasing the overall footprint of the district by nearly 30,000 square feet. The Hofstadter building is roughly 58,000 square feet. The new addition is going to be somewhere between 22 and 23,000 square feet. The district office is bigger than what we need for our administrative offices. There are other areas that we may need to consolidate, but by moving into a smaller space, we're basically not heating, not maintaining, not providing electricity for 28,000 square feet than we currently are, which if you do the math, that's about half an elementary school. So I do expect to see some savings. The construction project, right now the architects have given us, is that by the fall of 2016, we should be done with phase 3, which includes the STEAM addition, which will also correspond with the move of the administrative offices. So I'm pretty confident we will see energy savings and other maybe savings related to the maintenance of the buildings. How much is to be determined, but I do believe we'll see that.
Another question that came in, and it's a good question: will class sizes be considered as the budget develops? They definitely will. One of the point in the budget where we are right now is we certainly know how many sections we have right now and where those kids are moving as we head into next year. And as we look at the working budget and we look at the number of sections, we actually see that in two of our buildings, our outgoing 5th grade will be has 4 sections, which will be replaced by 3 sections. And in one of our buildings, our rising 4th graders into 5th grade are being replaced by 4 sections being replaced by 3 sections. So right now we see a decrease of 3 sections just from the moving things up. So those 3 sections are now available to us to be able to put in the 3 buildings in strategic places to lower class sizes. One place that we know has been a concern is kindergarten. Our kindergarten class sizes are creeping up higher than we like them to be, as we've seen a lot of new registration this year. Throughout the course of this year in our district, we've seen close to 100 new registrations, which correspond to about 100, which would have looked like a 100 student drop when we saw the seniors that graduated last year with a class that came in about 100 students smaller. But as the year has gone on, we've picked up nearly those 100 students, such that our overall enrollment is maintained steady from last year to this year, which is a good sign. And we do, as Chris said, we see new home construction, we see increase in the overall number of households in the district. So we need to take this into consideration. One of the, very likely will be, one of those 3 sections will be added at the kindergarten level. And that allows us to even it out across the district. Wherever that classroom goes, it'll go where we have the most space for that classroom. But then with the swing zones, it enables us to, as new registrations come in, to make that nice and even, so that we will see, expect to see a lot of attention paid to class sizes as we move forward. We're in a good position to pay attention to them, and the principals are working hard in all 3 buildings, and they're working together to do that. Anything come up here, question-wise, as we talked? Are there any other questions that I didn't answer or that Chris didn't answer? Let me make sure here. I think we've got everything. Anything else online? So one thing I wanted to mention about the online portion of this, because as I was listening to Chris, I was standing over Tara's shoulder and saw some of the comments that came through. We have a new director of technology, and one of the things he said is, he's getting up to speed with this, and there's some things that he'd like to suggest as we move forward with our forums. This is a great technology and a great opportunity to connect with people at home. At the same time, it has its glitches. I think, it'd be nice if the people at home could see Chris's pointer when he's pointing to the folks in the audience on the screen at home. They can't see that, so we're going to address that, work on some of the audio issues and things. But one of the things that will come in the capital project is one of the spaces in the blue room and red room that will be redone, will be set up so that these kind of broadcasts can happen to go home at any time with kind of the push of a few buttons. And the kind of effort and energy that Tara, Anne Marie, and Dave put in today to get this set up won't be necessary, because we'll have a facility for doing this.
And we did have a final question come in, so we'll address this. And the question is, does full-time or full-day kindergarten affect the salary costs? If we're referring to the line that was up here earlier, the answer is yes, but it doesn't have a significant increase on this year. And that's because those salary costs were fully budgeted in 2013-14. So we recognize that increase in our costs related to salary costs for additional teachers for full-day kindergarten. We also saw some reductions in transportation lines related to the cost we would save from some of the transportation expenditures we would otherwise have. So it does, because those teachers that are in full-day kindergarten are becoming more experienced and they need to be moving up a step. So that does impact it, but not to a very large extent.
Okay, so a couple other quick announcements. The Meet the Candidates night has been changed from May 6th back to May 5th. That's going to be on a Monday night here in the high school. That's at 7:30. The budget vote is on May 20th. And as there will be a second budget forum, which will fill this out and provide some more detail as we get to a nearly complete budget, and that's going to be on April 1st at 7:30 in the middle school cafeteria. So one last thing I wanted to mention, I saw an email I got today, and I thought Chris had kind of gone rogue on us. It said, Hills-Ballston Lake takes on New York State, and it was the heading of the email. when I clicked it real quickly and opened it up and found out that it was from our wrestling coach, and we have our 3 students who are going on to face state competition and go for state championships. So Christian Grumuglia and Joey Butler and Jake Ashcraft. So congratulations to them, and I'm glad it was that and not something else. So I think Joe would like to say a few words to close, and thank you very much for coming. Thanks for joining us online, and have a great night.
I wouldn't go wrong without that.
I want to thank everybody for here in the audience and at home. Again, this is the first of 2 forums. We will be doing another one here in April. You're always welcome to come to the, we have a finance meeting next Tuesday. You're more than welcome to come to that. You're also very much welcome to come to our Board of Ed meetings. They're in the calendar. They're every other Tuesday. But again, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and all the great answers, or great questions, and the information given by Superintendent McGrath and Assistant Superintendent Appy. With that, do have a fine evening. For those of you at home, I envy you, because now we get to go home in this fine weather. Thank you and have a nice evening.